The morning my father died was unseasonably warm for October. I remember the way the sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting long golden rectangles across the sterile linoleum floor. The antiseptic smell hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of wilting flowers someone had brought days earlier. My father's hand felt light in mine, his skin paper-thin and cool to the touch. The steady beep of the heart monitor had been our constant companion for 3 days, but in that moment, it changed to a single, sustained tone that seemed to stretch into eternity. I wasn't ready to say goodbye, but death rarely waits for permission. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, though everyone calls me Ellie. At 34, I never expected to be the one holding my family together through what would become the most devastating betrayal we'd ever face. Dad had always been our cornerstone, the mediator between my 3 siblings and me whenever conflicts arose. He was the voice of reason, the steady hand that guided us through life's storms. Without him, we were like a ship without an anchor, drifting into treacherous waters none of us saw coming. The hospital room fell silent after the nurses disconnected the machines. My younger sister Olivia sobbed quietly in the corner, her shoulders shaking with each breath. My brothers, twins Marcus and James, stood stoically by the window, their jaws clenched tight against the emotion threatening to spill over. And then there was my grandmother, Evelyn, sitting primly in the visitor's chair, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite having spent the night at the hospital. Her face betrayed nothing, not grief, not pain, just a calculating stillness that I would later recognize as the first sign of her treachery. "We should call your mother," Grandmother Evelyn said, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was steady, almost businesslike. "She'll want to know." The mention of our mothers sent a ripple of tension through the room. Sarah Mitchell had divorced our father 5 years earlier, a messy separation that left wounds still raw to the touch. She had moved to California, started a new life with a new husband, and maintained only the most tenuous connection to her children. I hadn't spoken to her in months. "I'll call her," I offered, grateful for something to do, some action to take that might momentarily distract from the crushing weight of grief pressing down on my chest. The hospital corridor was quieter than it should have been, as if the world itself was paying respect to our loss. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number, and when she answered, her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking from another lifetime. "Mom," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. "Dad's gone." The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her inhale sharply. "I'm sorry, Ellie," she finally said. "How are you holding up?" It was such an inadequate question, so removed from the reality of what was happening. How was I holding up? I was standing in a hospital corridor with my dead father lying in a room 20 feet away. I was watching my family fracture in real time. I was wondering how we would navigate the days and weeks ahead without the one person who had always shown us the way. "We're managing," I lied. "The funeral will probably be next week. Will you come?" Another pause, this one filled with the sound of her shuffling papers, the murmur of voices in the background. She was at work, I realized. My father had just died, and she was at work. "I'll try, honey. Things are complicated here, but I'll try." I knew what that meant. She wouldn't come. She would send flowers and a card with a generic message of sympathy. She would call to check in once or twice, and then she would retreat back into her new life, leaving us to pick up the pieces of the old one. "Right," I said. "I'll text you the details when we have them." When I returned to the room, Grandmother Evelyn was already on her feet, her designer purse clutched in her manicured hands. At 78, she moved with the precision and purpose of someone half her age. My father had always said she was made of steel beneath her silk blouses and pearl necklaces. "I've called my attorney," she announced. "He'll meet us at the house tomorrow to discuss the will and the estate. Your father left everything in perfect order, of course." Of course. Dad had been meticulous about everything, from the way he organized his tool shed to how he planned for his eventual death. He'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months earlier, and from that moment, he'd set about putting his affairs in order with the same methodical care he'd applied to every aspect of his life. "Tomorrow?" Olivia's voice cracked. Grandma, he just died. Can't this wait? Grandmother Evelyn's expression softened, but only slightly, like ice beginning to thaw but not quite melting. Grief doesn't pay the mortgage, dear. Your father would want us to be practical. The twins exchanged the look I couldn't quite interpret. Marcus, the older by 7 minutes and always the more outspoken of the two, cleared his throat. Ellie should handle it. She's the executor. I felt a jolt of surprise. Dad had named me executor. He hadn't mentioned it, though we'd had plenty of conversations about his wishes in those final months. I'd assumed he would choose Marcus, who had followed him into the family construction business and spent every day working alongside him for the past decade. Actually, Grandmother Evelyn said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before, there's been a change. Richard updated his will last month. I'm the executor now. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. What? I managed to say. That doesn't make sense. Dad would have told me. He was protecting you, Eleanor. He knew how difficult these past months have been for you, with your divorce and everything else. He didn't want to burden you further. My divorce. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. 6 months earlier, my husband of 8 years had announced he was in love with someone else, his 26-year-old assistant, the most cliched betrayal imaginable. The dissolution of my marriage had coincided with my father's declining health, a 1-2 punch that had left me reeling. But Dad had never once suggested that I couldn't handle my responsibilities. If anything, he'd leaned on me more during his illness, trusting me with his medical decisions and personal affairs. I don't believe you, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Grandmother Evelyn's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Believe what you like, dear. The documents speak for themselves. Now, shall we go? The hospital needs the room, and we have arrangements to make. The drive to my father's house, our childhood home, passed in a blur. I followed behind Grandmother Evelyn's sleek black Mercedes, my siblings crowded into my modest sedan. No one spoke. The weight of our loss filled every inch of the car, making it hard to breathe, hard to think beyond the next moment, the next mile. The house stood just as it always had, a sturdy 2-story colonial on a quiet street lined with maple trees now ablaze with autumn colors. Dad had bought it when I was just 2 years old, and it was the only home I'd ever known until college. Even after I'd moved out, married, and bought my own place across town, this house had remained the center of our family universe. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, impromptu barbecues on summer evenings, all the landmarks of our shared history were rooted here. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Grandmother Evelyn was already at the front door, key in hand. I frowned. Since when did she have a key? Dad had given me one when he first got sick, asking me to check on the place when he had extended hospital stays. But Grandmother Evelyn lived 40 minutes away in her upscale retirement community. There had never been a reason for her to have regular access to the house. Did you know Grandma had a key? I asked, turning to look at my siblings in the back seat. James shrugged, his face a mask of exhaustion. Dad probably gave it to her when he got sick. You know how he was about being prepared. But something felt off. Dad and his mother had always had a complicated relationship. They loved each other, certainly, but there was a formality to their interactions, a careful distance maintained on both sides. Dad visited her dutifully every other Sunday for lunch, called her weekly, sent flowers on her birthday and Mother's Day. But he rarely confided in her or sought her counsel. If anything, he seemed relieved when his filial obligations were fulfilled and he could return home. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and the lemon polish Dad used on the hardwood floors every Saturday morning. It was so achingly familiar that for a moment I could almost believe he was just in the next room, about to walk in and ask why we all looked so glum. The reality crashed back when Grandmother Evelyn set her purse on the entryway table with a decisive thud. I've taken the liberty of contacting Pearson's funeral home, she said. They're expecting us at 10 tomorrow to make the arrangements. Richard left very specific instructions. With you? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. He left funeral instructions with you? She fixed me with a cool stare. With his will, Eleanor. Which, as I said, names me as executor. Now, I suggest we all get some rest. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. Olivia, always the peacemaker, stepped forward. Grandma's right, Ellie. We're all exhausted. Let's just go home and deal with everything tomorrow. I wanted to argue, to demand answers to the questions multiplying in my mind, but the fight had drained out of me. Dad was gone. Nothing else seemed to matter in that moment. Fine, I conceded. But I'm coming with you to the funeral home, Grandma. We all are. Dad would want us involved in the decisions. Of course, dear. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. That night, alone in my empty apartment, sleep eluded me. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the occasional passing car on the street below. My thoughts raced in endless circles, replaying the day's events, searching for some explanation for Grandmother Evelyn's sudden prominence in my father's affairs. It made no sense. Dad had always been transparent with me about his wishes, his plans. We'd spent hours discussing what he wanted for his funeral, for the distribution of his assets, for the future of the construction company. Not once had he mentioned changing his will or making Grandmother Evelyn his executor. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and padded to the kitchen to make tea. As the kettle heated, I scrolled through my phone, looking at recent text exchanges with Dad. The last one had been just 4 days ago, when he was first admitted to the hospital for what would be his final stay. Bring my blue sweater when you visit tomorrow, he'd written. This place is freezing. Such an ordinary request. No hidden meanings, no cryptic final messages. Just my dad, always feeling cold in his final months as the cancer stole his strength and weight. On impulse, I opened my email and searched for any recent messages from him. There were several, mostly brief updates about his treatment or reminders about family birthdays. But one from 6 weeks earlier caught my eye. The subject line read Important Documents. I clicked it open. Ellie, it began, I've updated my will and power of attorney. Everything is with Stanley Greenberg at his office. You're still the executor, as we discussed. The combination to the safe in my closet is your birthday. Love you, kiddo. Dad. I stared at the screen, my tea forgotten. This directly contradicted what Grandmother Evelyn had told us. According to Dad's email, I was still the executor as of 6 weeks ago. Had he really changed his mind in the final month of his life? And if so, why hadn't he told me? Sleep was now completely out of the question. I paced my small apartment, waiting for the hours to pass until I could reasonably call Stanley Greenberg, Dad's attorney for over 20 years. At precisely 8 o'clock, I dialed his number. Stanley Greenberg's office, a cheerful receptionist answered. This is Eleanor Mitchell, Richard Mitchell's daughter, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to speak with Mr. Greenberg urgently. My father passed away yesterday. There was a pause, then a sympathetic murmur. I'm so sorry for your loss, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Greenberg isn't in yet, but I'll have him call you as soon as he arrives. When will that be? He has a court appearance this morning. He won't be in the office until after lunch. After lunch. Hours away. Too late for the meeting at the funeral home. Please tell him it's regarding my father's will. There seems to be some confusion about who the executor is. Of course. He'll call you as soon as he can. I hung up, frustration building inside me. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones, the same way Dad could always sense when a storm was coming, hours before the first clouds appeared on the horizon. At 9:30, I pulled into the parking lot of Pearson's funeral home, a stately Victorian house converted into a business that specialized in easing people through the worst days of their lives. My siblings arrived moments later, all of us converging at the front entrance like survivors of a shipwreck finding each other on an unfamiliar shore. Did you sleep? Olivia asked, linking her arm through mine. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally bouncy curls limp around her pale face. Not really, I admitted. You? She shook her head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad in that hospital bed. Marcus and James looked equally haggard, their identical features drawn with fatigue and grief. We stood together on the steps, none of us quite ready to go inside and make real the finality of what had happened. "Where's Grandma?" James finally asked, checking his watch. As if summoned by his question, Grandmother Evelyn's Mercedes pulled into the lot. She emerged looking immaculate in a charcoal gray suit, her silver hair arranged in its usual perfect coif. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize, tall and thin with wire-rimmed glasses and a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "Good morning," Grandmother Evelyn said as she approached. "This is Howard Blackwell, my attorney. He'll be helping us navigate the estate matters." I felt a surge of alarm. "Your attorney? What about Stanley Greenberg?" "Dad's been with him for decades." "Mr. Greenberg is no longer handling your father's affairs," she replied smoothly. "Richard transferred everything to Howard last month, at the same time he updated his will." The twins exchanged another of their inscrutable looks. Olivia's grip on my arm tightened. "That doesn't make any sense," I insisted. "Dad would have mentioned something that important." Howard Blackwell stepped forward, extending his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand this is a difficult time. Your father was quite clear about his wishes. I have all the documentation with me, if you'd like to review it after we've made the funeral arrangements." I ignored his outstretched hand. "I'd like to see it now, actually." "Eleanor," Grandmother Evelyn's voice held a warning note. "This is hardly the time or place. We're here to plan your father's funeral." "No, Grandma, I think this is exactly the time and place. Dad emailed me 6 weeks ago saying he'd updated his will with Stanley Greenberg and that I was still the executor. Now you're showing up with a different attorney claiming everything changed last month? Something's not adding up." A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed her perfectly composed face. "Your father was very ill in his final weeks, dear. Perhaps you misunderstood his email." "I didn't misunderstand anything. He was explicit." Howard Blackwell cleared his throat. "If I may, I have a copy of the will with me. It's quite straightforward. Mrs. Evelyn Mitchell is named as executor, and the estate is to be divided equally among the 4 siblings after certain specific bequests are fulfilled." "What specific bequests?" Marcus asked, speaking for the first time. Blackwell glanced at Grandmother Evelyn, who gave a slight nod. "The family home and the construction company are left to Mrs. Mitchell, with the understanding that she will determine their ultimate disposition at a later date." A stunned silence fell over our group. The house and the business, Dad's most valuable assets, the legacy he'd built over a lifetime, left not to his children but to his mother. It was incomprehensible. "That's impossible," Marcus finally said, his voice tight with anger. "Dad promised me the company. We talked about it for years. I've been running it with him since I graduated college. And the house," Olivia added, her voice small and hurt. "He always said it would stay in the family, that we'd decide together what to do with it." Grandmother Evelyn's expression remained impassive. "Your father changed his mind. He felt I would be better equipped to make these decisions objectively, without emotional attachments clouding my judgment." "Without emotional attachments?" I repeated incredulously. "It's our family home. It's supposed to have emotional attachments." "Please, let's not do this here," the funeral director said, appearing suddenly in the doorway. His practiced expression of professional sympathy did nothing to diffuse the tension crackling between us. "Fine," I said, turning to Grandmother Evelyn. "We'll discuss the funeral arrangements now. But this conversation isn't over. I want to see the will, the original, not just a copy. And I want to know exactly when and why Dad supposedly made these changes." She met my gaze unflinchingly. "Of course, dear. I have nothing to hide." The meeting at the funeral home was a surreal exercise in maintaining composure while discussing casket selections, flower arrangements, and memorial service readings. Dad had indeed left detailed instructions. He wanted to be cremated, his ashes scattered at the lake where he'd taught us all to fish. He wanted Bridge Over Troubled Water played at his service, and he wanted his old friend Pastor Mike to officiate. These details, at least, rang true. They sounded like Dad. But throughout the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Grandmother Evelyn took charge, making decisions with the funeral director as if the rest of us were merely observers rather than the children of the deceased. When I tried to interject or question a choice, she would smile thinly and say, "Your father and I discussed this, Eleanor. This is what he wanted." By the time we finished, my head was pounding and my patience had worn dangerously thin. As we exited the funeral home, I pulled my siblings aside while Grandmother Evelyn spoke with her attorney by her car. "This isn't right," I said in a low, urgent voice. "Dad wouldn't have cut us out like this. He wouldn't have given Grandma control of everything without telling us." Marcus nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. "I'm calling Stanley Greenberg as soon as I get to my car." "This is bullshit." "Maybe there's an explanation," Olivia suggested, always willing to give the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe Dad really did change his mind when he realized how sick he was getting." James, who had been unusually quiet all morning, finally spoke. "Or maybe Grandma is lying. Maybe she forged the will." We all stared at him. James was the peacemaker of the family, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. For him to suggest something so extreme was shocking. "That's a serious accusation," I said carefully. He shrugged, his eyes on Grandmother Evelyn across the parking lot. "Think about it. Dad's been sick for months. His handwriting was shaky. His mind was foggy from the pain meds. It wouldn't be hard to fake his signature or convince him to sign something he didn't fully understand." "But why would she do that?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's our grandmother. She loves us." "Money," Marcus said flatly. "The business is worth millions. The house is paid off and sitting on 2 acres in the best neighborhood in town. That's a hell of a motive." I felt sick at the thought, but I couldn't dismiss it outright. Grandmother Evelyn had always lived comfortably, but her lifestyle, the luxury car, the designer clothes, the exclusive retirement community, suggested resources beyond what we knew of her finances. Dad had mentioned once that his father hadn't left much when he died, just enough for Grandmother Evelyn to live on if she was careful. Had she been careful? Or had she been quietly struggling all these years, watching her son build a successful business while she made do with less than she desired? "We need to talk to Stanley Greenberg," I said decisively. "And we need to see the original will, not whatever copy Blackwell is carrying around." "Agreed," Marcus said. "I'll call you after I talk to Stanley." As we broke apart to head to our respective cars, Grandmother Evelyn called out to me. "Eleanor, a moment please." I approached her with caution, aware of Howard Blackwell watching our interaction with keen interest. "I know this is difficult for you," she said, her voice softer than it had been all morning. "You and your father were always so close. But I want you to understand that everything I'm doing is what Richard wanted. He trusted me to take care of his affairs and to look after all of you. If that's true, then you won't mind if I speak with Stanley Greenberg to confirm the changes to Dad's will." Something flickered in her eyes, concern? Guilt, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Of course not. Though I'm not sure what good it will do. The will is legally binding." "We'll see about that," I said, turning away before she could respond. Back in my car, I called Stanley Greenberg's office again. This time, I was told he was in court and unreachable until late afternoon. Frustration mounting, I decided to go directly to his office and wait for him there. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The law offices of Greenberg and Associates occupied the 2nd floor of a modest building downtown. The receptionist looked up in surprise when I entered, clearly not expecting visitors. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Greenberg isn't back yet. I'll wait, I said, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs in the small reception area. It's important. She hesitated, then nodded. Can I get you some coffee or water? Water would be great, thank you. As she disappeared into a back room, I noticed a stack of file folders on her desk. The top one was labeled Mitchell, Richard. My heart raced. Without thinking, I glanced around to make sure I was alone, then quickly reached over and flipped the folder open. Inside was a document dated just 2 months earlier, my father's will. I scanned it rapidly, my eyes jumping to the key provisions. There it was in black and white: I hereby appoint my daughter, Eleanor Mitchell, as the executor of my estate. And further down, I bequeath my residence at 1247 Maple Street to my 4 children, to be shared equally or disposed of as they unanimously agree. And finally, I leave my business, Mitchell Construction, to my son Marcus Mitchell, with the provision that he retain his brother James Mitchell as an employee for a minimum of 5 years should James wish to remain with the company. This was the will I expected, the one that reflected Dad's wishes as he had expressed them to me countless times. There was no mention of grandmother Evelyn as executor, no provision leaving the house and business to her discretion. I heard footsteps and quickly closed the folder, returning to my seat just as the receptionist reappeared with a bottle of water. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Do you know how much longer Mr. Greenberg will be? His court appearance was scheduled to end at 3, so he should be back within the hour. Are you sure you want to wait? I can have him call you. I'm sure, I said. I'll wait. The hour crawled by, each minute stretching into what felt like 10. I scrolled through my phone, pretending to be absorbed in emails while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd seen. If the will in Stanley Greenberg's office was the real one, then the document Howard Blackwell had shown us was a forgery. But how could I prove it? And more importantly, how could grandmother Evelyn have orchestrated such a deception? At last, the office door opened and Stanley Greenberg walked in, his silver hair disheveled and his tie slightly askew after a day in court. He stopped short when he saw me. Eleanor, he said, genuine warmth in his voice despite his obvious surprise. I was going to call you. I'm so sorry about your father. I stood, suddenly uncertain how to begin. Thank you. I need to talk to you about Dad's will. There seems to be some confusion. He frowned. Confusion? What kind of confusion? My grandmother claims she's the executor. She showed up with an attorney named Howard Blackwell who says Dad changed his will last month, leaving her in charge of everything and giving her the house and the business. Stanley's frown deepened. That's impossible. I spoke with your father 3 weeks ago. He never mentioned changing his will or hiring a new attorney. So the will naming me as executor is the valid one? As far as I know, yes. It was signed and properly witnessed 2 months ago. Your father was of sound mind and very clear about his wishes. He paused, his expression troubled. This is very concerning, Eleanor. If someone is claiming there's a newer will, we need to see it immediately. Howard Blackwell has it. He's my grandmother's attorney. Stanley's eyebrows shot up. Howard Blackwell. I know him. He's got a small practice on the east side of town. Handles mostly real estate transactions, some estate planning. Not the sort of attorney I'd expect your father to switch to, especially for something as complex as his estate. So you think the will might be fake? He chose his words carefully. I think we need to examine it very closely. Wills can be contested if there's evidence of fraud, undue influence, or if the testator wasn't of sound mind when it was signed. Dad was on heavy pain medication in his final weeks, I said. Sometimes he was confused, especially toward the end. Stanley nodded grimly. That could be relevant. Look, I need to see this other will. Can you get me a copy? I'll try. Grandmother Evelyn has it, or Blackwell does. In the meantime, I'll file a petition with the probate court to recognize the will I have on file. That will at least slow things down until we can sort this out. I felt a surge of relief. Thank you, Stanley. I knew something wasn't right about this. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Your father was my friend for 30 years, Eleanor. I'm not going to let anyone distort his final wishes. As I left his office, I felt both vindicated and terrified. If Grandmother Evelyn had indeed forged a will or coerced my father into signing one while he was incapacitated, we were facing not just a family crisis but a legal battle that could tear us apart. And somewhere in the middle of it all was the truth about what Dad really wanted for us after he was gone. I called my siblings and arranged to meet at my apartment that evening. This was a conversation we needed to have face-to-face, away from Grandmother Evelyn's watchful eyes and listening ears. They arrived together, a united front for perhaps the first time since childhood. I ushered them into my small living room, where I'd laid out the notes I'd taken during my meeting with Stanley Greenberg. So it's true, Marcus said after I'd explained everything. She's trying to steal our inheritance. We don't know that for sure, Olivia cautioned, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? James scoffed. Ellie saw Dad's real will with her own eyes. It names her as executor and leaves the house to all of us and the business to Marcus. There's no misunderstanding. Grandma is lying. I paced the length of my living room, trying to organize my thoughts. The question is why? Why would she do this? She's never seemed particularly interested in the business, and she has her own home in that fancy retirement village. Money, Marcus repeated his earlier assessment. The business cleared $1.7 million last year. The house is worth at least $800,000 in today's market. That's a hell of a nest egg. But she's 78, Olivia pointed out. What's she going to do with all that money at her age? A memory surfaced, something Dad had mentioned in passing months earlier. Remember when Dad said Grandma had been talking about moving to that luxury retirement community in Florida? The one with the private golf course and the yacht club? The twins nodded slowly. James spoke first. Pelican Bay. Dad said the buy-in was over $1 million, plus monthly fees. So she needs money, I concluded. A lot of it, quickly. Enough to steal from her own grandchildren? Olivia's voice cracked with hurt. Enough to betray Dad's wishes? None of us had an answer for that. The Grandmother Evelyn we thought we knew, proper, sometimes distant, but fundamentally decent, seemed incapable of such calculated deception. But the evidence was mounting that we hadn't known her at all. What do we do now? Marcus asked, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Stanley's filing something with the court, but how long will that take? Meanwhile, Grandma has access to the house, to Dad's papers, to everything. We need proof, I said. Something that shows the new will is fraudulent or that Dad wasn't competent when he supposedly signed it. His medical records would show when he was on heavy medication, James suggested. If the will was signed during a period when he was heavily sedated. Good thinking, I nodded. I have access to his medical records as his healthcare proxy. I'll request them tomorrow. What about witnesses? Olivia asked. Will needs witnesses, right? Who witnessed this supposed new will? I don't know, I admitted. We need to see the actual document. Marcus stood abruptly. I'm going to the house. Now. I want to see if there's anything there that might help us, notes, emails, something that shows what Dad was really thinking in those final weeks. I'll come with you, James said, rising to join his twin. Wait, I cautioned. What if Grandma is there? Then we'll confront her, Marcus said, his jaw set in a determined line. I'm done tiptoeing around this. It's our house, our legacy. She has no right to take it from us. I exchanged a worried glance with Olivia. Marcus had always been the hothead of the family, quick to anger and slow to forgive. A confrontation with Grandmother Evelyn now, when emotions were raw and facts still unclear, could be disastrous. Let me call her first, I suggested. I'll find out where she is, make sure the coast is clear. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. I dialed Grandmother Evelyn's cell phone, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Eleanor," she said when she picked up, her voice cool and composed as always. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I lied. "I was just wondering where you are. The twins and I wanted to go to Dad's house to start sorting through some of his personal things, if that's okay." A pause, brief but noticeable. "I'm actually at Richard's house now. Howard and I are going through some paperwork in his office. Perhaps you could come tomorrow instead? It's getting late." It was barely 7 o'clock. "Actually, Grandma, we'd really like to come tonight. We all took time off work for the funeral preparations, and we need to get back to our jobs tomorrow." Another pause, longer this time. "Very well. I suppose we're nearly finished here anyway. Give me an hour to wrap up with Howard, and then the house is all yours for the evening." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. "We appreciate it." As soon as I hung up, Marcus was on his feet again. "She's there now? With Blackwell? What are they doing?" "Going through Dad's paperwork," she said. "Destroying evidence, more likely," James muttered. "We need to go now," Marcus insisted. "Not in an hour. Now." I hesitated, torn between the need for caution and the fear that Marcus might be right, that every minute we delayed gave Grandmother Evelyn more time to cover her tracks. "Okay," I finally agreed. "But we need to be smart about this. No accusations, no confrontations. We're just there to collect some of Dad's personal items, as far as she knows." We took 2 cars, the twins in Marcus's truck, Olivia and me in my sedan. The drive to Dad's house was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears about what we might find or not find when we arrived. The house was ablaze with lights when we pulled up, every window glowing against the gathering dusk. Grandmother Evelyn's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with a modest Volvo that presumably belonged to Howard Blackwell. "Remember," I cautioned as we approached the front door, "we're just here for personal items. Nothing about the wool yet." I used my key to let us in, calling out as we entered. "Grandma? It's us." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a drawer closing firmly. Footsteps approached from the direction of Dad's home office, and Grandmother Evelyn appeared in the hallway, her expression carefully neutral. "You're early," she observed. "I thought I asked for an hour." "We were already on our way," I explained smoothly. Traffic was lighter than expected. Howard Blackwell emerged from the office behind her, his leather portfolio tucked under his arm just as it had been that morning. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think we've covered everything for now. I'll be in touch tomorrow about the probate filing." Grandmother Evelyn nodded. "Thank you, Howard. I'll walk you out." As they moved toward the front door, Marcus brushed past me and headed straight for Dad's office. I followed quickly, aware that we had only moments before Grandmother Evelyn returned. The office was meticulously neat, as Dad had always kept it. His desk was clear except for a computer monitor, keyboard, and a single framed photo of the 4 of us children taken at Christmas several years earlier. The filing cabinet in the corner stood with one drawer partially open. Marcus went directly to the cabinet and began rifling through the files. "Tax returns, insurance policies, property deeds," he muttered, flipping through the neatly labeled folders. "Nothing about a new will." I moved to Dad's desk and tried to wake his computer, but it was password protected. "Does anyone know Dad's computer password?" I asked. James shook his head. He was paranoid about security. Changed it every month. I remembered the email Dad had sent me. "The safe," I said suddenly. "Dad has a safe in his closet. He told me the combination is my birthday." We heard the front door close and Grandmother Evelyn's footsteps returning toward the office. Marcus quickly shut the file drawer, and I stepped away from the computer. "Finding what you need?" Grandmother Evelyn asked from the doorway, her gaze sweeping over us suspiciously. "Just looking for Dad's watch," Marcus said smoothly. "The one Grandpa gave him. I thought he'd want me to have it." All of Richard's valuable personal items are being inventoried for the estate, she replied. Nothing is to be removed from the house until the will is probated. The will you claim he signed last month? I couldn't help myself. The one that conveniently gives you control of everything? Her expression hardened. I see Stanley Greenberg has been filling your head with nonsense. Richard made his wishes very clear to me. If you choose to contest the will, that's your right, but I warn you it will be expensive and ultimately futile. We'll take our chances, Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Dad would never have cut us out like this, and you know it. Grandmother Evelyn's posture stiffened, her chin lifting in defiance. Your father was disappointed in all of you in different ways. Eleanor with her failed marriage and inability to give him grandchildren. Marcus with his reckless business decisions that nearly bankrupted the company last year. James with his lack of ambition. Olivia with her string of unsuitable boyfriends and dead-end jobs. She paused, letting her words sink in like daggers. He loved you, but he didn't trust you with his legacy. That's why he turned to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Each of us had been struck where we were most vulnerable, our private insecurities and perceived failures laid bare with surgical precision. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. You're lying, Olivia finally said, her voice small but steady. Dad would never say those things about us. Believe what you want, Grandmother Evelyn replied coldly. The will speaks for itself. Now, if you're finished here, I have arrangements to make. The funeral is in 3 days, in case you've forgotten. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. We heard her enter the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing, the clink of ice in a glass. She's unbelievable, Marcus whispered furiously. Did you hear what she said about us? About Dad. She's trying to divide us, I said, keeping my voice low. Don't let her get to you. We need to find that safe. We slipped out of the office and up the stairs to Dad's bedroom. The master suite was exactly as he'd left it, bed neatly made with the blue quilt our mother had sewn years ago, reading glasses on the nightstand beside a dog-eared mystery novel, slippers placed precisely at the foot of the bed. It felt wrong to be there without him, invasive somehow, but we had no choice. The walk-in closet was organized with Dad's typical precision, suits and dress shirts on one side, casual clothes on the other, shoes lined up in perfect rows below. At the back, partially hidden behind a rack of winter coats, was a small safe built into the wall. My birthday, I murmured, kneeling before it. Month, day, year. I entered the 6 digits, and the safe clicked open. Inside was a stack of documents, a small jewelry box, and a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I took out the envelope. The others gathered around me, watching in tense silence as I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Ellie, it began, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. The combination to this safe is known only to you and me. I've left copies of all important documents here, my will naming you as executor, the deed to the house, the business succession plan for Marcus. Don't trust my mother. She's been pressuring me to change my will in her favor, claiming she needs money for medical treatments she won't discuss. I've refused, which has caused a rift between us. If anything happens to me suddenly, or if a different will surfaces, investigate carefully. Love, Dad. The letter was dated just 3 weeks earlier, well after the will Stanley Greenberg had on file and around the time Grandmother Evelyn claimed Dad had changed everything. Holy shit, James breathed. Dad knew. He suspected she might try something like this. Medical treatments? Olivia questioned. Is Grandma sick? Or is that just what she told Dad to try to get money out of him? Marcus countered. I set the letter aside and examined the other documents in the safe. There was indeed a copy of the will I had seen in Stanley Greenberg's office, along with the deed to the house, insurance policies, and a detailed succession plan for Mitchell Construction that outlined how Marcus would take over with James as his second-in-command. We need to get these somewhere safe, I said, gathering the papers. And we need to show the letter to Stanley Greenberg. What about Grandma? Olivia asked, her voice shaking slightly. She's downstairs right now, probably destroying evidence. Shouldn't we confront her? I considered our options. With the documents from the safe, we had strong evidence that the will grandmother Evelyn was presenting was fraudulent. But a direct confrontation now, without legal representation, could be dangerous. She might claim we had forged Dad's letter or stolen documents that rightfully belonged to the estate. Not yet, I decided. Let's secure these papers and talk to Stanley first. We need to do this right. We carefully replaced the safe door, making sure it locked securely, then made our way back downstairs. Grandmother Evelyn was in the living room, a glass of scotch in her hand, Dad's favorite Macallan 18, I noted with a flare of indignation. She looked up as we entered, her gaze immediately falling to the envelope in my hand. Find something interesting? She asked, her tone deceptively casual. Just some old photos, I lied, slipping the envelope into my purse. Memories. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't challenge me either. I've been thinking, she said instead, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. Perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot with all this estate business. I know Richard's decisions may seem surprising to you, but he had his reasons. I'm sure he did, I replied neutrally. We're going to head out now. It's been a long day. Of course. She took a sip of her scotch, watching us over the rim of the glass. The funeral home called while you were upstairs. Everything is arranged for Saturday at 11. They need the clothes Richard will be dressed in. I thought his navy suit, the one you wore to your wedding, Eleanor. The mention of my wedding, a day that now seemed to belong to another lifetime, was clearly deliberate, a reminder of my failed marriage as she had so cruelly put it earlier. I refused to take the bait. That sounds perfect, I said. We'll see you on Saturday, Grandma. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed face. I felt as if I'd been holding my breath the entire time we were in the house, and now my lungs were finally expanding again. She knows we found something, Marcus said as we gathered by our cars. Did you see how she was watching you? Let her wonder, I replied. We have what we need now. First thing tomorrow, we take Dad's letter to Stanley and start the process of contesting the fake will. What if it's not enough? Olivia asked, voicing the fear that had been nagging at me since we discovered the letter. What if she's covered her tracks too well? Then we dig deeper, I said with more confidence than I felt. Dad trusted us to figure this out. We won't let him down. That night, I slept with the envelope containing Dad's letter under my pillow, irrationally afraid that Grandmother Evelyn might somehow break into my apartment and steal it while I slept. When morning came, I called Stanley Greenberg before I even had my first cup of coffee. I have proof, I told him without preamble. A letter from Dad warning that Grandma was pressuring him to change his will and that if a different will surfaced, we should investigate. When was this letter written? Stanley asked, his voice sharp with interest. 3 weeks ago. And there's more, Dad left copies of his real will and other important documents in a safe that only I knew how to open. Bring everything to my office immediately. This changes everything. An hour later, I sat across from Stanley as he examined Dad's letter and the documents we'd retrieved from the safe. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read. This is serious, Eleanor, he said finally. Your father is essentially alleging that your grandmother attempted to commit elder abuse by pressuring him to change his will while he was ill. And if she did forge a will or coerce him to sign one while he was incapacitated by medication, that's criminal fraud. The word criminal hung in the air between us. Despite everything, I found it hard to imagine Grandmother Evelyn in handcuffs, being led away by police. She was our grandmother, Dad's mother. How had we come to this? What happens now? I asked. I'll file an emergency petition with the probate court today, including your father's letter as evidence. We'll request that the court recognize the will I have on file as the valid one and appoint you as executor immediately. We'll also ask for an injunction preventing your grandmother from disposing of any assets or removing anything from your father's home. And if the court agrees, then you'll be in charge of the estate, as your father intended. The house and business will be distributed according to his true wishes. And Grandma? Stanley's expression softened slightly. That will be up to you and your siblings. If you choose to pursue criminal charges for fraud or elder abuse, that's your right. But it would mean a public trial, publicity that might damage the family business, and, of course, the emotional toll of testifying against your own grandmother. The thought made me sick. For all her faults, all her apparent deception, Grandmother Evelyn was still family. The idea of sending her to prison in her late 70s seemed cruel, disproportionate somehow. Let's focus on getting the right will recognized first, I said. We can decide about criminal charges later. Stanley nodded. A wise approach. I'll file the paperwork today and request an emergency hearing. These matters usually take weeks or months, but given the circumstances and your father's explicit warning, the court might expedite things. I left his office feeling both relieved and burdened. We had evidence, a plan, legal representation, all good things. But we were also embarking on a battle against our own grandmother, a woman who had been part of our lives since birth. Whatever the outcome, our family would never be the same. I called my siblings from the car, putting them on speakerphone as I drove. Stanley's filing for an emergency hearing, I explained. He thinks we have a strong case with Dad's letter. Thank God, Marcus said. When will the hearing be? He's pushing for as soon as possible, maybe even tomorrow or Friday. Before the funeral. What about Grandma? Olivia asked, the concern evident in her voice. Does she know what we found? Not yet. She'll be served with the court papers, probably later today. There was a moment of silence as we all contemplated what that would mean, the shock, the anger, the potential for an even deeper rift in the family. She brought this on herself, James finally said, his normally gentle voice hardened with resolve. She tried to steal our inheritance, to override Dad's wishes. She doesn't get to play the victim now. He was right, of course. Whatever happened next, Grandmother Evelyn had set these events in motion with her deception. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to such extremes. Was it really just about money? Or was there something deeper, some long-simmering resentment or need that none of us had recognized? The court moved with unexpected speed, scheduling an emergency hearing for Friday morning, the day before Dad's funeral. I spent Thursday gathering additional evidence, Dad's medical records showing he was on high doses of morphine during the period when the fraudulent will was supposedly signed. Statements from his hospice nurses about his mental state in those final weeks, emails and text messages between Dad and me discussing his wishes for the estate, all consistent with the will Stanley Greenberg had on file. Grandmother Evelyn, meanwhile, had gone silent. She didn't call, didn't respond to messages about the funeral arrangements. Howard Blackwell filed a brief opposing our petition, arguing that Richard Mitchell had been of sound mind when he changed his will and that the letter I'd produced was either forged or written during a period of paranoia induced by his medication. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzly, the weather matching the somber mood as we gathered at the courthouse. I spotted Grandmother Evelyn and Howard Blackwell in the hallway outside the probate courtroom, deep in conversation. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, though her posture remained rigid and her clothing impeccable as always. She glanced up as we approached, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before sliding away. There was something in that look, not guilt or remorse, but a kind of weary resignation that caught me off guard. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, then focused her attention on the letter from Dad. This letter, if authentic, is quite damning, Mrs. Mitchell, she said, addressing Grandmother Evelyn directly. Your son explicitly states that you were pressuring him to change his will and warns his daughter to be suspicious if a different will appears after his death. How do you respond to that? Grandmother Evelyn rose slowly, her hands gripping the table in front of her. My son was very ill, Your Honor. The medications affected his thinking. He became paranoid in those final weeks, imagining conspiracies where none existed. And yet the medical records indicate he was lucid and competent when he wrote this letter, 3 weeks before his death. His doctors and nurses have provided statements to that effect. I loved my son, Your Honor. Everything I've done has been to protect his legacy. By overriding his clearly stated wishes for his estate? The judge's tone was skeptical. The will you've presented was supposedly signed during a period when Mr. Mitchell was heavily sedated. The witnesses to this will are both employees of your attorney, Mr. Blackwell, who has represented you personally for years but had no prior relationship with your son. Grandmother Evelyn had no response to this. She simply stood there, her face a mask of dignity despite the judge's clear implication of wrongdoing. I am ruling in favor of the petitioners, the judge announced after a brief pause. The will dated August 15th, filed by Stanley Greenberg, is recognized as the valid last will and testament of Richard Mitchell. Eleanor Mitchell is hereby appointed executor of the estate, effective immediately. An injunction is granted preventing Evelyn Mitchell from disposing of any assets or removing any items from the deceased's residence. She fixed Grandmother Evelyn with a stern look. The court takes allegations of will fraud very seriously, Mrs. Mitchell. The petitioners have indicated they are not pursuing criminal charges at this time, but that option remains open to them. And just like that, it was over. We had won. Dad's true wishes would be honored. The house would remain in the family, the business would go to Marcus with James's position secured. Everything as it should be. Except nothing felt like a victory. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the courtroom, I watched Grandmother Evelyn confer quietly with Howard Blackwell. Her shoulders were slumped, her usual perfect posture abandoned. She looked every one of her 78 years, and then some. "Grandma," I called out impulsively as she turned to leave. "Can we talk? Please?" She paused, then nodded once, curtly. "Not here. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop across from the courthouse. My siblings decided to wait in the car, giving me space for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a barista behind the counter and an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. Grandmother Evelyn ordered a black coffee, no sugar, austere, like everything about her. I chose a latte, needing the comfort of something warm and sweet. We sat at a table by the window, the rain streaking the glass and blurring the world outside. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Why?" I finally asked, the single word containing all my hurt, all my confusion. She took a sip of her coffee before answering. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." She set her cup down carefully, her manicured fingers arranging it just so on the saucer. "I'm dying, Eleanor. Cancer. Stage 4. It's in my bones, my liver, everywhere. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it doesn't matter. Nothing can be done." "Of course it matters. You're our grandmother. We deserve to know." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "Did you? When was the last time any of you visited me, called me, showed any interest in my life?" Richard came dutifully every other Sunday, but even he was just going through the motions. I was an obligation, nothing more. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. We had taken Grandmother Evelyn for granted, assumed she was fine in her retirement community with her bridge club and her book group. We'd never really asked about her life, her needs, her fears. "That still doesn't explain why you tried to steal our inheritance," I said, pushing past the guilt her words had evoked. "I wasn't stealing it," she insisted. "I was securing my future. The retirement community I live in doesn't provide end-of-life care. When the cancer progresses, I'll need to move to a specialized facility. The kind that costs thousands of dollars a month, that requires a substantial deposit up front. My insurance won't cover it. My savings won't cover it. So you asked Dad for help?" I did. Multiple times. He offered to pay for in-home care, to have me move in with him. But I didn't want that kind of dependency, that loss of dignity. I wanted financial security, the freedom to make my own choices about my final months. She paused, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. He refused. Said he needed to secure your futures first, that his responsibility was to his children. So you forged a will. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. I did what I had to do. What any mother would do. No, Grandma. Not any mother. Not any grandmother. Most would have been honest with their family, asked for help directly. And would you have helped? Would you have given up your inheritance to pay for my care? The question hung between us, unanswerable. Would we have? I like to think so, but the truth was I didn't know. We'd never been given the chance to make that choice. We'll never know now, I said finally. But what I do know is that you've destroyed whatever trust existed in this family. Dad's funeral is tomorrow, and instead of coming together to mourn him, we're sitting here in the aftermath of a court battle you forced on us. She flinched slightly, the first crack in her composure. I did what I thought was necessary. I won't apologize for trying to secure my future. Even at the cost of your relationship with your grandchildren? With Dad's memory? Even then. But her voice wavered, just slightly. I sat back, studying her face, the familiar features that had always seemed carved from marble, unyielding and perfect. Now I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by keeping them wrapped around her coffee cup. What will you do now? I asked. Die, eventually. Sooner rather than later, according to my oncologist. Her attempt at dark humor fell flat, leaving only the stark reality of her prognosis hanging in the air between us. I mean about money, about care. She shrugged, a gesture so uncharacteristically casual it seemed borrowed from someone else. I have some savings. It won't last long once the serious care begins, but perhaps I won't need it for long. The implication, that she expected to die quickly, perhaps alone and without proper care, hit me harder than I expected. For all her deception, all her manipulation, she was still my grandmother. Still Dad's mother. And she was facing death with the same steely resolve she'd approached everything in life. We'll help you, I heard myself say. Not because you deserve it after what you've done, but because it's what Dad would want. He wouldn't let you face this alone, no matter what had happened between you. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked. I don't want your pity, Eleanor. It's not pity. It's family. Complicated, messy, sometimes terrible family, but family nonetheless. I took a deep breath. I'll talk to my siblings. We'll figure something out about your care. But in return, I need you to be honest with us from now on. About everything. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. When she finally looked up, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before, vulnerability, perhaps even a hint of remorse. I can do that, she said quietly. We sat in silence after that, two women bound by blood and history, separated by deception but connected still by the memory of the man we had both loved in our different ways. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean, preparing it for whatever came next. Dad's funeral the next day was a steady and controlled emotion. The four of us siblings sat in the front row, with Grandmother Evelyn beside us, a united front for the community that had come to pay their respects, whatever private battles raged beneath the surface. Pastor Mike spoke eloquently about Dad's life, his contributions to the town through his business, his devotion to his family. Friends and colleagues shared memories that made us laugh through our tears. And when it was over, when the last mourner had offered condolences and departed, we gathered at the lake as Dad had requested. The day had cleared, the rain giving way to watery sunshine that sparkled on the surface of the water. One by one, we took handfuls of Dad's ashes and scattered them across the lake where he had taught us to fish, to swim, to appreciate the quiet beauty of nature. Grandmother Evelyn went last, her hand trembling visibly as she released her portion of the ashes. Goodbye, Richard, she whispered, so softly I barely caught the words. I'm sorry. In the months that followed, we rebuilt our lives around the absence Dad had left. Marcus took over the construction company, with James working alongside him just as Dad had intended. Olivia went back to school to finish her degree, inspired by Dad's constant encouragement to pursue her dreams. I threw myself into my role as executor, making sure every detail of Dad's estate was handled exactly as he had wished. And Grandmother Evelyn? We kept our promise to help with her care. We found a hospice facility that balanced quality care with dignity, and we took turns visiting her, not out of obligation but out of a complicated mix of duty, compassion, and the gradual healing of old wounds. She died 7 months after Dad, on another unseasonably warm day. In her final weeks, she spoke more openly than she ever had in life, sharing stories of her youth, her marriage, her struggles as a young widow raising Dad alone. I came to understand, if not fully forgive, the desperation that had driven her to such extremes. In the end, the inheritance Dad left us was more than just a house and a business. It was the lesson that family, even at its most dysfunctional, its most challenging, is worth fighting for. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather choosing to move forward with clear eyes and open hearts. That sometimes the greatest acts of love come disguised as difficult choices. As I stand now at the lake where both Dad's and Grandmother Evelyn's ashes mingle with the waters, I think about legacy. Not the material possessions we leave behind, but the stories, the lessons, the complicated web of relationships that define us long after we're gone. Dad's legacy was one of integrity, of putting family first. Grandmother Evelyn's was more complex, a cautionary tale, perhaps, but also a reminder that fear can drive even good people to desperate acts. My siblings join me at the water's edge, our shoulders touching as we watch the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. We are changed by what we've experienced, scarred but stronger, bound together by the truth we fought to uncover and the understanding we've gained along the way. Some inheritances can't be forged or stolen. Some legacies can't be rewritten, no matter how clever the deception. In the end, it's not the will that matters, but the way we choose to honor those we've lost, the way we choose to live with those who remain, the way we forge our own paths forward through the tangled wilderness of family.